Ever been erased from your own life, publicly? This one gets cold fast. Stay with me till the end, and hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Ray Stinson stopped me at the ballroom doors and didn't even lower his voice. Sorry, sir. Guests wait outside. The words hit harder than they should have, because everyone in the lobby heard them, and nobody even pretended not to. My name is Cal Hartman. I was 41 that night, living in Charlotte, and I'd been married to Serena for 9 years. I was 43 now, and I still remembered how the glass looked between me and my own wife. Clean, thick, and final. It was a chilly Saturday in early November, the kind of night where the sidewalks shined under hotel lights like they'd been waxed. Serena was rising fast at Stonegate Development Partners, and their annual gala at the Harrington Plaza was her big victory lap. She'd been talking about it all week, like it was the day she finally got seen. That week I stayed up past midnight twice, running load checks on a minor span change her team kept brushing off. I rewrote the structural summary and her talking points so the board donors wouldn't grab the wrong line and start asking questions Serena couldn't answer. I did it because I was a licensed structural engineer and because I'd spent years cleaning up behind her deadlines. Before we keep going, share in the comments which country you're watching from. And let's continue. Before she left the house, she kissed my cheek, smoothed my tie like I was part of her outfit, and said, "Meet me there at 8. Tonight is ours." I believed her because that was my job in our marriage. I walked into the Harrington lobby with my shoulders up and my head clear, like I belonged in that room as much as she did. I headed for the ballroom doors and smiled at the noise spilling out, already picturing Serena turning and grabbing my hand. Ray glanced at his tablet, then at me, then back down like the screen might change if he stared hard enough. "Sir, I can't let you in. Guests wait outside." I kept my voice steady. "I'm Cal Hartman. Serena Hartman is my wife." He scrolled again and gave me that polite face people use when they're saying no, without admitting they're judging you. "I don't have you on the list." Through the glass, I saw white tablecloths, champagne flutes, and couples sitting like they came as a match set. I saw Serena near the stage laughing with Brent Lyle, her executive coordinator, mid-30s, perfect hair, standing too close like he'd paid for the air around her. Serena turned, met my eyes, and didn't flinch. Her smile stayed on, but her mouth moved slow and clear. "Just for me. This isn't for you." Then she angled her body away and kept laughing. I slid my phone back into my pocket, nodded once at Ray like he'd done me a favor, and walked out into the cold. The cold slapped my face as soon as the doors shut behind me, and I kept moving because I refused to give anybody the satisfaction of watching me hesitate. I walked past the valet stand, found my truck, and climbed in like I was leaving a job site, not my wife's big night. I didn't go back in to argue, and I didn't call Serena because I already knew how she'd spin it. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and let the last year roll through my head like camera footage you can't unsee once you notice what's missing. Serena had skipped 3 of Piper's school things in a row, and she did it with the same excuse every time. Something came up. After the music program, I told her, "Piper waited for you in the front row and kept asking if you were coming." Serena didn't even look up from her phone. "You need to stop keeping score, Cal, because this is not helpful," she said, like I'd invented our kid's face falling. Then she hit me with the budget talk, so Piper couldn't go to a summer STEM camp that cost $1,950. I agreed because Piper was listening, and I didn't want her hearing her parents fight about money. 2 weeks later, I found a receipt for a $9,740 bracelet tucked inside Serena's coat pocket, and the lie sat in my palm like it had weight. Her site trips started looking fake once I paid attention. There were hotel charges in our own city, ride shares to restaurants nowhere near any of her projects, and conference badges she swore she'd left at the office that never reappeared. Todd from down the street caught me one afternoon and said, careful but blunt, "I saw Serena downtown with a younger guy from her office, and they looked real comfortable." That was the same night she told me she was flying to Raleigh, and I drove home with that sentence grinding in my head. Work was the part that made my jaw tighten, because work was supposed to be solid. I started seeing my structural concepts in Serena's slide decks, my details renamed, and her name planted on top like she'd built it from scratch. Then, an automated email came from the state licensing portal saying a permit package had been submitted using my engineering stamp that week, and my stomach dropped because I knew I hadn't stamped anything new. That fear went straight to my hands and made them cold. Years earlier, during a rushed submittal, I'd set up my digital seal on a shared laptop for Serena's team and never pulled the access back, and now it felt like I'd handed someone a weapon and walked away. I started the engine, drove home on autopilot, and by the time I parked in my driveway, I understood the Gala wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a message, and it meant there was more I hadn't seen, so I opened the licensing email again and saved screenshots into a new folder. I locked the folder, slid my phone into my pocket, and finally opened the truck door. I stepped out of my truck and went inside like I was walking into a job that never ended. The house smelled like yesterday's coffee and Piper's strawberry shampoo, normal things that didn't match the way my chest felt. I locked the door, checked the deadbolt out of habit, and set my phone on the counter like it was a tool I might need fast. Serena got home late enough that the lights were already off, and she moved through the hallway like she didn't want to be seen. She didn't ask why I was quiet, and I didn't offer anything, because I wasn't interested in another night of her acting like my reactions were the problem. When morning came, I hadn't slept much, and the air in the kitchen felt thin and sharp while the coffee dripped. Around 7:20, the doorbell rang with the kind of confidence that made my jaw tighten. It wasn't a friendly tap or a polite wait, it was a clean, practiced press like whoever it was assumed I'd jump. I opened the door, and there stood Brent Lyle holding a leather folder like he was delivering orders. He didn't say, "Is this a bad time?" He didn't even pause on the porch to let me decide. He stepped in like he'd been here before, eyes moving across my living room in quick, greedy sweeps, lingering on Piper's backpack by the stairs and the stack of my drafting books on the table. His cologne hit me a second later, expensive and too controlled, like he never sweated. "I need Serena's quick signature on some quarterly project paperwork," he said, and his tone made it clear he thought I was an obstacle with legs. It was the way you talk to a front desk guy when you don't want questions. I kept my face flat and said, "She's getting ready, so you can wait right there." He lifted his hands a little like he was harmless, and I caught the cufflinks when his sleeves shifted. They were custom and flashy, the kind you only buy when you want people to notice you have money. I'd seen them before in a photo Serena posted from a leadership retreat she told me was all women, and that little detail landed like a slap because it meant she hadn't even tried that hard. Brent walked past me and set the folder on my work table, right over the sketch pad where I'd been fixing a beam layout for one of Serena's active projects. He did it on purpose, like he wanted his fingerprints on my space. He smiled at me, soft and clean, and said, "Serena's finally getting the seat she deserves, and it's the kind of seat where not everybody fits." He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. Serena came down the stairs in her work dress, with her hair smooth and her face already on. Her eyes went straight to Brent, and the way she lit up for him made something in my stomach go hard. She didn't ask why he was here, and she didn't look at me like I mattered in the room. "You came early," she said to him, warm and easy, like he belonged in our kitchen. I stayed by the coffee maker and watched them talk in that tight, private way, heads angled close, voices low like they were sharing a joke I didn't earn. Serena flipped open the folder, signed where Brent tapped his finger, and slid it back to him like it was nothing. Brent laughed once, and Serena touched his arm like it was normal, like it was nothing, and the casualness of it made my hands clench around my mug. Then his attention drifted, and his eyes slid toward my desktop computer on the side desk, like he was hunting for something. I didn't raise my voice or puff up my chest, because that would have been the reaction he wanted. I just stepped over and put myself between him and the computer, close enough that he'd have to bump me to get past. Brent stopped, blinked like he was surprised I had a spine, and then he smoothed his expression back into that polite mask. A minute later he left, folder tucked under his arm like he owned the papers and the air. He gave me a small nod at the door, the kind you give a man after you've taken something from him. As the door clicked shut, Piper padded into the kitchen in her socks, looked up at me, and asked, "Dad, why does Mom's friend act like he lives here?" I set my mug down hard on the counter and turned to her. I looked down at Piper and kept my voice steady, because she was 10 and she deserved a straight answer, not my anger. "He acts like that because he forgets his place, and your mom lets him," I said. Then I grabbed a clean bowl and started making her breakfast, like the kitchen wasn't suddenly hostile. Piper watched me for a second like she wanted to ask more, so I moved us along before she could. I pointed her toward her shoes, signed Piper's school folder that needed signing, and got her out the door with my hand on her shoulder. A few days later, I dropped her off at school and walked her to the line like always, smiling at kids I barely knew and pretending my head wasn't full of broken glass. Ms. Kincaid caught me near the classroom door with that careful teacher voice, the one that says, "I have a problem, and I'm trying not to make it worse." She held a clipboard tight against her chest and said, "Mr. Hartman, I just want to confirm your updated emergency contacts before we finalize them." Then she turned the form toward me, finger sliding down the list like she was showing me something normal. Serena's name was first, and right under it was Brent Lyle. Not my name, not my number, just Brent's, with a note that he was approved for pickup if needed, and could be included on school communications. My throat went tight, but I kept my face still because Ms. Kincaid hadn't done anything wrong, and Piper was 10 feet away laughing with her friends like her world was steady. Ms. Kincaid glanced at me and added, "We can change anything today if it was entered by mistake." I nodded once and said, "Thank you for catching it, and I will handle it in writing." Then I took a picture of the form and handed the clipboard back. On the drive home, I didn't call Serena, and I didn't give myself a speech about staying calm. I just filed it away as proof that this wasn't an affair hiding in corners anymore. It was a takeover happening in plain daylight. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a beat and let the engine idle, then I shut it off and walked inside like I was clocking into something I didn't ask for. That night, Serena fell asleep fast, phone on the nightstand like she'd already decided I didn't matter enough to worry. I stared at it longer than I want to admit, because crossing that line felt like turning a key in a lock I'd promised not to touch. Then I picked it up anyway, kept my breathing quiet, and opened it with the passcode I'd known for years. My thumb hovered for a second, then I tapped into her messages and searched Brent's name. The thread wasn't flirty, which somehow made it worse, because it sounded like a business plan. There were dates, talking points, and a line that hit me so hard I had to reread it twice. After my promotion, we handle Cal. Another message mentioned keeping my stamp under control and routing certain payments through a design consulting allowance so it looked clean in monthly reports. I didn't scroll like a jealous husband. I scrolled like a man watching his license get shoved into a grinder. Earlier that same evening, Piper had repeated something Serena must have said in a voice note, casual as anything. Put it in the Redwood folder, not the shared drive. Piper didn't know what it meant, but my gut did, and I set the phone back down like it was hot. I went straight to my office closet and yanked the old tablet off the top shelf, the one Serena told me was dead and useless. I plugged it in, watched the screen flicker, and felt my pulse spike when it powered on like it had been waiting. A different email account popped up, already signed in, with folders lined up like a Second Life, organized in neat little boxes. I tapped the one labeled Redwood and opened it. I stood there in the dark with that tablet glowing in my hands, and I didn't let myself spiral or start guessing. I just took what was in front of me and treated it like evidence, because that's what it was. I snapped photos of the screen, wrote down the email address showing at the top, and backed out without clicking around like an idiot. Then I shut the tablet off, put it back on the shelf, and went to bed beside Serena like nothing had changed. The next morning I drove Piper to school, kept my voice normal, and smiled when she told me a joke I barely heard. After drop-off, I didn't go to work, and I didn't go home either. I headed for a diner off the highway, where the coffee always tasted burnt, and the booths were cracked vinyl. The kind of place where nobody listened, unless you invited them to. Kendra Shaw was already there with a legal pad and a pen, shoulders squared like she'd been waiting for a fight. Kendra and I went way back, the kind of friendship that survived college, weddings, and long gaps where life got busy. She was a family law attorney now, and she had that calm, no-nonsense look that made people stop performing. She slid a mug toward me and said, "Tell me what's happening, and do not waste time protecting anybody's feelings." I took a sip, set the mug down, and started talking. I didn't retell every detail like I needed sympathy, because that wasn't why I was there. I gave her the facts, the public shutout, the school form, Brent walking into my house like he owned it, and the messages that talked about handling me like I was a broken appliance. Kendra didn't gasp, and she didn't do the soft voice. She nodded like she'd already seen this movie and didn't care for the ending. "Okay," she said, flipping her pen between her fingers. "Now we move like adults. We document. We protect your kid. We protect your license." She leaned forward a little and kept it simple, like she was explaining a drill to someone who needed to execute it right the first time. Custody is about stability, finances are about proof, and careers are about paper trails. If Serena wants to erase you, you don't fight with feelings, you fight with receipts. For the next 3 months, I lived 2 lives, and I did it on purpose. By day, I played the steady husband Serena expected, the one who made dinner, asked about Piper's homework, and didn't pick fights at 9 p.m. when she wanted peace. Serena liked me best when I was quiet and predictable, so I gave her quiet and predictable. I didn't accuse her, and I didn't chase her, because chasing is what gets you framed as unstable. By night, I worked like a man building a case. I copied drawing sets, exported PDFs, pulled revision histories, and saved the little metadata stamps people forget are there when they're rushing. I gathered what I could prove was mine, including templates I'd built years ago, and details I always used, right down to the phrasing and legends. I also started placing tiny watermark notes in my own work, nothing loud, just small tracking marks that would mean something later when somebody swore they came up with it. Kendra brought in a forensic CAD consultant who spoke like a normal person instead of a tech show-off. He told me, in plain English, how authorship and timestamps could be verified without me sounding like I was making excuses. Then I pulled city permit records for the packages filed under my stamp, and my stomach turned when I saw submissions dated on days I'd been at Piper's school or out of town. That wasn't sloppy. It was someone using my credentials like a spare key. I started storing everything in a private archive and labeled it boring on purpose, because secrecy isn't about drama. It's about not giving your opponent a chance to destroy the evidence before you can use it. I saved the newest permit record, locked the folder, and shut my laptop with both hands. After I shut my laptop, the house went back to pretending it was normal. Serena was asleep down the hall like she hadn't spent months carving me out of my own life, and the quiet almost felt like a dare. I rinsed my coffee mug, wiped the counter, and moved through the kitchen slow and careful, like sound itself could tip her off. When the clock flipped and the whole place still felt tight in my chest, I took my phone and sat back down at my desk. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I logged into an engineering form I used years ago, back when I still felt like my career was mine and not some accessory to Serena's rise. I didn't use my real name, and I didn't use my work email because I wasn't stupid. I posted under my mother's maiden name and kept my profile plain, like I was just another guy who couldn't sleep. There was an anonymous case challenge pinned to the top of the page about stabilizing an old downtown theater slated for redevelopment. It was a simple description with brutal constraints, the kind of thing that wakes your brain up because there's no room for ego. Limited access, aging masonry, a roof load problem, and a budget that didn't match the owner's dreams. I read it twice, then answered it straight, not showing off, just solving it the way I solve things. I laid out clean logic, clear steps, and a cost-saving redesign that kept the building alive without turning it into a science project. When I hit post, I didn't feel proud, and I didn't feel heroic. I just felt like my hands remembered who they were. I shut the browser, went back to bed, and kept my face calm the next morning while Serena talked about her day like nothing was wrong. 2 days later, the forum admin sent me a private message. "Someone wants to talk about your solution," it read, "and they asked if I can pass along your number." My thumb hovered over the screen because part of me wanted to stay invisible until this whole thing was over. Then I remembered the glass doors at the Harrington and how easy it was for Serena to act like I didn't exist. So I typed back, "Yes, you can share it," and I hit send. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was sitting in my truck outside a hardware store, and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was smooth, older, and impatient in a way that sounded like money. "This is Colson Drake," he said. "I'm the CEO of Keystone Structural Group, and I read what you posted." I stayed quiet for a beat, and he kept going like he didn't care about my surprise. "I don't care about politics," he said. "I care about who actually builds the solution, and you do." He offered me a senior role, Chief Design and Risk, with a base salary of $392,000 plus equity, like he was offering me a chair at a table I'd been locked out of. I didn't tell Serena, and I didn't tell Piper because I wasn't handing my enemies a map. I only told Kendra, calling her from my office with the door closed. "Keystone just offered me a job," I said, keeping my voice low. Kendra didn't celebrate, and she didn't warn me off with fear. "Good," she said. "Now keep your mouth shut and keep building your proof, because leverage works best when nobody sees it coming." That same week, an email hit my personal inbox from my university department, short and heavy. My old mentor, Dr. Malcolm Sloan, had died after a fast illness, and the memorial details were right there like an assignment. I stared at the message longer than I meant to, then I cleared my calendar and went alone, because I wasn't dragging Serena into anything that mattered to me. At the memorial, I sat in the back and listened to people talk about Sloan's work and his stubborn honesty, and I could almost hear his voice cutting through the room. Years ago, he'd looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you hide your name, you train the world to forget it." I didn't walk out feeling inspired, and I didn't make a vow to be a better man. I walked out steady, like something heavy had settled into place and wasn't going to move again. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet, and I went straight to my desk without hesitating. I opened my private archive, clicked the boring label I'd been using, and renamed it Sloan File. Then I hit enter. Renaming the folder didn't make Serena nicer, it just made me quieter. Once she sensed I wasn't chasing her anymore, she started switching masks to bait me. One day she was overly sweet, rubbing my shoulder and saying, "We're fine, Cal, stop overthinking." And the next day, she was ice cold, acting like I was an employee who'd messed up. She watched me for a reaction, and when I stayed calm, she slammed a cabinet door like she was daring me to yell. Her mother, Diane, showed up unannounced and planted herself at my kitchen table like she owned the place. She looked me up and down and said, "Serena is moving up and she needs a stronger partner for that level." I told her, "If you came here to judge me, you can walk right back out," and she gave me a tight smile like my calm was proof I was weak. A week later, Serena tried a softer voice, which was how I knew it was a threat. She said, "Custody could get complicated if you can't handle stress, and I don't want Piper stuck in the middle." I kept my eyes on her and said, "Do not use our daughter to test me." She even said, "Judges hate chaos," like she'd been studying my weak spots, and then she turned away like she'd gotten what she wanted. Brent started showing up in Piper's world on purpose, like he was practicing being a second parent. He dropped off a fancy tablet from Mom's team, then appeared near school pickup, grinning at strangers and waving at Piper like it was normal. Piper asked me why he was always around, and I told her, "You stay with me at pickup, no matter who smiles at you." I didn't confront him out there because a public blow-up was exactly the story they wanted. Instead, I emailed Ms. Kincaid that I did not authorize Brent Lyle for pickup or school communication, and I asked for written confirmation. Janelle Voss kept me from spiraling, mostly by talking to me like I was capable. She had a sharp mouth and a good heart, and she didn't let me romanticize my own patients. She said, "Stop trying to win their respect and start tracking their moves," and she pulled her husband Dorian into it because he understood numbers better than feelings. Dorian laid out the statements and found repeating transfers labeled consulting that lined up with Brent's travel and purchases. 18,500, 22,900, and one big hit at 61,300. The money didn't go straight to him, and Dorian pointed at the routing and said, "See that? It bounces through Redwood Advisory Services, then lands in an LLC tied to Brent, and that layering is not an accident." Not long after, a quiet email hit my burner account from Helene Brody, Serena's office manager. It said, "I can't do this anymore. I saved something you should see," and my pulse kicked up because helpers don't step forward unless they're scared. I told her to meet somewhere public, and she picked a grocery store parking lot under bright lights. She climbed out with a manila envelope and said, "I'm done covering for her," then handed me printed emails where Serena flat out asked to remove my name from the Gala guest list to avoid embarrassment. I slid the papers into my jacket, got in my truck, and drove before anyone could change their mind. I got home with Helene's envelope still warm from her hands, and I didn't even take my shoes off before I locked it away. I slid the papers into my desk safe behind a stack of old specs. Then I washed my hands like that could scrub off what I'd just learned. Serena walked in a little later, talking about traffic and deadlines, and I answered with short, normal words until she stopped looking at me. Late October, the next Gala invitation showed up in the mail, thick paper with gold lettering that felt expensive just holding it. It had only Serena's name on the front, no guest line, no spouse, like I was a clerical error that didn't need fixing. Serena set it on the counter in plain view, not tucked away, and that choice was its own kind of threat. She poured herself coffee and said, calm as anything, "It's better if you stay home with Piper that night because I need to network without distractions." She said distractions like she meant me, and she didn't bother to soften it. I nodded and kept my voice even. "Sure, Serena, whatever makes your night easier," I said, and I watched her relax for half a second because she thought she'd won again. I wasn't trying to win arguments anymore, because arguments were smoke, and she knew how to use smoke. I was trying to win a future where my kid and my license were not collateral damage. That meant I acted like the harmless husband while I built something sharper underneath. Kendra lined up the legal moves while I lined up the practical ones, and we kept it clean and boring on purpose. In her office, she tapped my folder and said, "Backups, verified timestamps, and a narrative that doesn't require anyone to trust your mood." I told her, "I can do boring, and I can do precise," and she nodded like that was the only language that mattered. "Good," she said, "because the other side is counting on you to explode." Helene agreed to sign an affidavit, and when she said yes, her voice shook just enough to tell me she knew what she was risking. "I'll put my name on it," she said, "because I'm tired of watching her use people like tools." Kendra didn't thank her with warm words. She just said, "We'll protect you the best we can, and we'll stick to facts." Helene swallowed hard and answered, "Facts are all I have left." Dorian arranged to be inside the Gala as part of a finance compliance team, which meant he could get close to the board without looking like a random guy hunting drama. He met me for lunch and slid a printed chart across the table, neat columns and clean arrows. "These consulting transfers line up with Brent's travel and purchases," he said. "And the routing through Redwood Advisory Services is the kind of layering investigators actually care about." I kept my voice low and said, "So we make it easy for them to see." And he answered, "Exactly. We spoon-feed it so nobody can pretend it's confusing." Janelle handled the part I didn't want to admit mattered, which was how I looked walking into their world. She stood in my hallway with her hands on her hips and said, "You are not showing up looking like you slept in your truck because being dismissed starts with looking dismissible." She dragged me to a tailor, made me get a haircut, and told me to stop hunching like I was apologizing for existing. I didn't argue, because she was right, and I was done giving people easy reasons to shrug me off. Kendra forwarded the Redwood money trail to a federal financial crimes unit, not as revenge, but because the transfers had enough red flags to justify an official look. When she called me afterward, she didn't sound excited, she sounded focused. "They already have an open file on Redwood Advisory Services," she said, "so your timing matters more than your emotions." I took a slow breath and told her, "Then we hit them where they can't ignore it." And she said, "You draft the board email like you're writing to exhausted people who hate surprises." That night, I built one email to the Stonegate board with attachments organized by project date, authorship proof, stamp misuse, and the payment routing laid out like a timeline a tired executive could understand. The plan was not to storm the ballroom or scream Serena's name, because that would make me the story. The plan was to stand where they put me last time, outside the glass, so everyone could see exactly who they told to wait, and I finished by clicking save on the draft and setting a calendar alert for Gala night. On Gala night, in early November, I pulled into the Harrington Plaza lot at about 8:10 and parked like I'd done it 100 times, slow and deliberate. The air had that cold bite that made the hotel lights look sharper, and my new suit felt almost too clean for what I was about to do. I walked through the lobby like I was returning a borrowed item, not asking permission, just showing up where I'd been told I didn't belong. Ray Stinson was at the same glass doors with the same tablet, and his shoulders tensed the second he saw me. He opened his mouth like he was going to start the script, and I saved him the trouble because he didn't deserve to be my enemy. "I know," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Guests wait outside." Ray swallowed, glanced down at his screen, and gave me a small nod like he was grateful I didn't make him say it out loud again. I wasn't mad at him, because he was just the gate, and Serena was the one who built the fence. I took a few steps back, so I was fully visible through the glass, shoulders squared, hands steady at my sides, not pacing like a man begging to be let in. I wanted it clear this was their choice, not my failure, and I planted myself there like a fact nobody could argue with. Through the doors, I could see the whole room glowing warm, all white tablecloths and polished smiles. Serena was up near the stage in a bright dress with perfect posture, one hand on the microphone like she'd been born holding it. Brent hovered close in that confident half-smile, standing just off her shoulder like the room belonged to him too, and like he belonged to her. Serena started talking, and I couldn't hear every word through the glass, but I didn't need to. I saw her mouth shape the phrases I'd written a year of late nights to support, and I saw people nod like they understood the magic. Then she hit the line, clear enough I could read it. Structural innovation kept our flagship projects under budget, and my teeth pressed together because that was my work wearing her lipstick. I pulled out my phone and typed one text to Dorian, "Now." My thumb didn't shake, and my stomach didn't flip, because this part wasn't emotion anymore, it was timing. Across the room, Dorian moved like he belonged there, drifting toward the board table with a neutral face like he was checking something routine. I opened my drafted email, scanned the recipient list one last time, and hit send to Gordon Wexler and the other board members Kendra had flagged from public filings and Helene's notes. The attachments were stacked by project date, clean and boring, the way powerful people prefer their disasters delivered. I slipped my phone back into my palm and watched the board table like it was a control panel. Gordon glanced down at his phone, frowned, and then sat up straighter in a way that made the hair on my arms lift. Two board members leaned in over his shoulder, and their faces changed fast. Confusion first, then focus, then that tight look people get when they realize they've been played by someone they trusted. A woman at the table covered her mouth for a second, then dropped her hand and started scrolling hard, like she was trying to outrun what she was reading. Gordon stood up so suddenly his chair scraped, and the sound cut clean through the music. He raised a hand, interrupted Serena mid-sentence, and said loud enough to turn heads, "Ms. Hartman, stop. We need you off the stage now." The room didn't just go quiet, it snapped quiet, the kind you feel in your teeth when a party turns into a problem. Serena froze with the microphone halfway to her mouth, blinking like somebody had switched the script on her. Brent stepped in quick, palm at her elbow like he was protecting her, and I watched him try to steer her toward the side corridor with that fake calm he wore so well. Before they made it 3 steps, 2 men in plain suits, posted near the side corridor like they'd been waiting, stepped out, and one of them said, "Brent Lyle, we need to speak with you right now," like it wasn't a request. Brent's face went pale so fast it was almost funny, and his voice jumped an octave when he snapped. "This is a misunderstanding, and she approved everything, so talk to her." One of the men said, flat and controlled, "Financial crimes and embezzlement are not misunderstandings," and Brent's eyes darted like a trapped animal looking for a door. Serena turned toward the glass like she felt the shift in the air, and her gaze landed on me for the first time all night. I lifted my phone, aimed it straight through the glass, and hit record while I held her stare. I kept my phone up until Serena's eyes slid away, and I stopped recording only when the suits guided Brent toward the side hall and the room started buzzing again. I didn't wait for Serena to run out and hiss at me, because that would have turned it back into a marriage fight. I put my phone in my pocket, nodded once at Ray, and walked out into the cold like the hotel had never mattered. I didn't sit in the emergency board meeting, because Kendra wouldn't let me. When I called her, she said, "Go home and be with your kid, and let the paper do the talking." Later, she showed me the minutes, and Gordon Wexler called me once, short and blunt, to confirm my stamp had been misused and flagged in multiple submissions. Stonegate put Serena on immediate leave that night, then terminated her 2 weeks later when their internal archive logs and Helene's affidavit matched my file history and the city permit timestamps. Agent Miles Caro never gave me gossip, and I respected that. He told Kendra what he could on the record. Brent's LLC was a funnel, Redwood Advisory was a pass-through, and there were enough transfers to support charges without anyone needing my feelings. Serena's story in the filings was that Brent handled details, like she'd been too busy to notice the mess. The problem was the emails, because she asked for my removal from the guest list and wrote about keeping my stamp under control. The state licensing board opened a review on me, which was my biggest fear, and I cleared it with my affidavit, city logs, and proof I wasn't the submitting party on those packages. Custody got ugly for a minute, but facts beat performance every time. With school records, written contact restrictions, and Serena's travel pattern laid out in plain dates, I ended up with primary custody and a stable schedule for Piper. Stonegate offered a settlement and retroactive consulting pay, and I took a smaller amount than they offered because I wanted clean terms. I demanded a full liability release tied to my stamp and a written acknowledgement of my authorship, and they signed. I accepted Colson Drake's offer and started at Keystone Structural Group that winter. On my first day, there was a door with my name on it, and nobody acted like that was strange. About a year later, through the usual grapevine and one court exhibit Kendra showed me, Serena was working at her brother Cody's auto service office doing payroll and vendor calls, with no spotlight and no speeches. Keystone held our own gala at the Harrington Plaza, and I made one rule for planning. No spouse gets left outside, no solo invites, no games. Piper came with me in a simple dress, squeezed my hand like she was testing if I'd let go, and I didn't. We walked up to the glass doors, and this time I pushed them open and walked her inside. Real quick before you bounce, what would you do if someone tried to erase you from your own family and make you look unstable? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people, then please subscribe and like. It's one click and it matters a lot. And drop a comment, even good story, or tell me what you would have done.